So
Cool.
hi everyone. Today we have Michael Pearl from Cyvers, which is a proactive Web3 security company. Very excited to have Michael here. My name is Ake. I'm with the Chainstack developer experience team, and Chainstack is the number one Web3 infrastructure company. And today we are going to talk a lot of different perspectives on the Web3 security, and we're talking to Michael, who is an expert here. Michael is the VP and the GTM strategy at Cyvers. So, Michael, a little bit of introduction on yourself, on Cyvers, on your background.
Yeah, thank you, Ake. Thank you so much for having me here. Very glad to be here. So, a little bit about myself, and then we can dive in to talk about Cyvers. Michael Pearl, live in Israel. I'm in the crypto slash fintech space for over a decade. I still remember the small meetups with four geeks in a room trying to convince you to buy Bitcoin. I think I should have been more convinced back then. I should have bought a little bit more. Um, but I was involved in several projects. I remember the 2017 ICO craze that I was very much involved in, kind of from the outside as an advisor and working for companies providing services to the industry. Recently, I've worked with a company called Intentable, a blockchain technology company in the DeFi space, dealing with intent, account abstraction, things of that sort. And recently, I've joined Cyvers as a VP go-to-market strategy. In terms of my education, I'm a lawyer. Nobody's perfect, but that's what I used to do. Not so much practicing right now. That's in a nutshell about me. Cyvers is a Web3 cybersecurity company, AI powered and based. We were AI before it was cool. So the idea is basically the premise of the company was founded on, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it in a second, but it was founded on the idea that audits are important, but they're not sufficient, they're not enough, because as we saw with many companies, and I'm sure we're going to dive into some examples. Performing an audit in the pre-launch phase is again very important, crucial, but it's not going to really cover you in terms of protecting your assets and your clients' assets. And that's why you need real-time monitoring for your assets, and that's exactly what Cyberse brings to the table. 24/7, guardian angel of the assets, whether it's smart contracts or wallets, and obviously detection in real time, notifying the clients and help them mitigate any type of attack, whether it's hacks, scams, frauds, other types of malicious activity in Web3 that we're going to dive in a second. So that's us.
All right. Yeah, this is very exciting. So, as an overview, the topics we're going to go through today is different attack categories, and because security in Web3 is not just smart contracts. There is a lot of fun stuff to it. We're of course going to touch on CERSEC as well, because Michael has a unique perspective on this. And we're going to talk whether there is a need or whether there is a way to do a standard kind of common knowledge base of all the practices that web security guys do. And then we're going to talk the Cyvers products, which I'm personally very excited to hear about. But before that, Michael, since you touched on you being a lawyer, being in this legal space, legal business, which honestly I don't think we see a lot of people having both of the perspectives on this and being in the industry for so long. So I'm really curious to hear your perspective as a lawyer, as a legal person, but also as being a Web3 guy head to toe. So what can you tell us about this?
So, cybersecurity obviously has a very close proximity to both the regulation part and the legal part, right? Because the people that are the malicious players are obviously, if and when we can actually undox them and find out who actually did the hack or another malicious activity. Obviously, they're persecuted, and we often hear that in the news. Obviously, it's not enough because oftentimes you can't really find the person who did it. You can know and you can tell which wallet was involved in it, and kind of the more adjacent wallets and entities. But oftentimes you cannot really get to the real person, or even the real, location of the person. I'm not even talking about identifying the actual attacker. Having said that, law enforcement agencies are, trying to constantly evolve and also to hire the right people, which is kind of a rat race, because it constantly, the hackers are becoming more and more um, uh, innovative and smart, and that's always a race. But yeah, there are some successes. But with respect to regulation, I think that the regulation is still at a very, very nascent stage. I mean, we see only hints with respect to regulation for Web3 cybersecurity. Obviously, as you know, when it comes to the more financial side of things, like let's say securities law, it's very, very developed, right? This whole argument, this whole discussion about Gary Gensler and his policies, it all evolves around the fact that regulators, financial regulators around the world, are trying to implement and trying to put out a framework for how to deal with investors, what you can disclose, what you don't have to disclose, how to market to investors, and so on and so forth. So with that respect, the regulation is very, very advanced and progressed, and people are working on it. So you're going to see a lot of new regulations coming forward. Just to give you an example, I think that the most progressive one would be Europe, the European Union, with the MiCA regulation that has obviously a very comprehensive element to it. When it comes to Web3, regulators are kind of silent. And come to think of it, it's kind of weird, right? Because if you can lose money, if me as an investor, if I can lose money due to market manipulation, insider job, and so on, you can bet yourself that you can lose much more funds, and actually across the board, not only for one investor but for a bunch of investors, when it comes to security issues, right? So sometimes the companies can actually make amends and help the investors, go into their deep pockets and pay to the investors whatever they lost in the hack. But oftentimes they cannot, and the company can just go broke. And I'm sure we're going to discuss some examples in a second.
Right.
So it's quite mind-boggling that the regulators are not doing enough with respect to that. Actually, I mentioned Micah, and Micah has some clause that are relevant for Web3 cybersecurity, right? What standards do you expect to have for a Web3 company? But even there, it's kind of very, very obscure, and it requires interpretation. They say that you need to have comprehensive Web3 security solutions. What does that mean, right? So I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of discussions, and this will obviously influence our industry. This will influence the way that companies are being set up right now. Obviously nobody cares about security from the get-go. You're saying to yourself, I'll wait until I have 50 million TVL, but that's going to change. Even DeFi protocols are going to be more minded towards security because the regulators are going to be more proactive about it. So we're kind of in a transition phase with that respect.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. This is very interesting. Uh, as an end user, I have a quick question on this because Web
Mm-hmm.
2 has been around for quite some time, right? And as an end user, for example, if I get scammed in Web 2, for example, I go online, hit a page, and transfer money from my bank account to somebody else's card or from my card to somebody else's card. If I do the same thing through address poisoning, on which I'm going to expand a little bit but later, but basically send to scammers' address my crypto funds. And if I go to the law enforcement, is this going to be if I go with the Web 2 case, and if I go with the Web 3 case, are those going to be different in how the law enforcement and the regulation treats me? Or because on the surface they are kind of similar, right? What can you tell me about this?
It is quite similar in a sense that somebody tricked you to send money to the wrong address, or somebody, right now there's a huge issue about what's called pig butchering, right? Basically tricking you to send money to a person. In that case, it's not to the wrong address. You're sending to a person which you think should receive the money, either because they
All
have
right.
some sort of a romantic relationship with you online, or other ways of Nigerian prince and so on. And obviously all those cases are quite similar. The difference is probably is the technology and the medium, right? You're either sending fiat through wire transfer, or you're sending crypto through the blockchain. But the difference is that obviously, in crypto and in blockchain in general, the anonymity is key, right? And the differentiation between your real identity and your on-chain identity is something that oftentimes hackers and scammers are hiding behind. And with that respect, and here it's more granular when you come to different jurisdictions, right? So some law enforcement agencies are more progressed, and they're using companies, by the way, such as ours as well, because we're also in talks with several law enforcement agencies on helping them uh, to do forensics. Okay, just like in CSI, when you do forensics
Okay.
on a crime scene, by the same token, you do a forensics in blockchain, right? You're trying to figure out, to trace the money trail, to understand, what was the origin of the attacker, which wallet was the first one, the originator, and then you try to figure out, which contact points this wallet has, to try to understand, to get to the real person, right? But it's extremely hard, and you need to do a combination of on-chain and off-chain investigations. Uh, People are still trying to wrap their heads around it. It's not easy. Having said that, putting law enforcement aside, there are some ways to go about it in a more kind of a civil, traditional, legal, and not only legal actions that you can take. Just to name a few, for instance, more centralized tokens like USDT, you know that they can freeze assets and burn
Oh
assets,
yeah.
and do all sorts of actions with USDT tokens. So if you are able to prove the money trail, and you see that the money is in the hands of a wallet, you can actually do something about it. Same thing with centralized exchanges. Centralized exchanges are eventually legal entities in different jurisdictions. So if you see that money was stolen and then funneled into, let's say, Binance, Coinbase, whatever, and by the way, we see that all the time, right? We see that all the time because we can see wallets that are malicious, but the exchanges that do not work with us, oftentimes when they work with kind of the more traditional compliance intelligence providers, they see these wallets as in the green, so to speak, right? These wallets are clean as far as they care, because there's a latency. It takes quite a while before a wallet is flagged as a malicious wallet. So they can accept money that originated in a hack, scam, and so on. But after they do that, there are some lawyers and some experts that can actually help you retrieve the money, either through some connections there, or by litigation and things of that sort. So there are ways to go about it, but they are A, expensive, B, take very long time, and C, don't always work. So that's definitely
Okay.
something that the industry has to take care of. We're helping with that. Hopefully, we're going to have some news around that very, very soon. But it's a huge issue right
Yeah.
now. It's definitely not perfect.
All right. Yeah, I'd be very excited to hear the news. Um,
Hmm.
on that point, let's actually talk three different attacks. Because a lot of people, when they think Web3 security, they think smart contract security, right? But
Hmm.
we can let's just do a quick run through the different types, and as Michael can tell us, expand on
Hmm.
those. So one of the types would be manipulating an existing smart contract. The other, and we're going to touch on this with the UWU hack. The other one
Hmm.
would be uh, would be Sordic one, where
Mm-hmm.
secure a smart contract audit security audit company is actually involved with a centralized entity, and the final one would be something that is really interesting and to which Cyvers contributed was the biggest contributor in discovering
Mm-hmm.
this would be address poisoning. But
Mm-hmm.
since Uwu attack happened recently, let's do a quick run on the Uwu one,
Mm-hmm.
just to give people an idea.
Yeah, so we can talk about the Uwu one. It's really hard to say Uwu one
Oh
in a
yeah.
sequence.
All right.
but but I think that for your audience, obviously we'll talk about the specific example. But I think that before we dive in, I think it's worthwhile to kind of explain in a kind of a bird's eye view what smart contract vulnerabilities exploits are and the different forms that they take. So very simply put, smart contracts, as your listeners and viewers probably know, they are basically immutable algorithms, right? That allow that kind of comprise the tech stack of any protocol, right? If you are using Uniswap, 1inch, lending protocols of different sorts, when you go below the hood, basically what you see is a bunch of smart contracts. Now, smart contracts are immutable, and that's why people trust them on one hand, right? Meaning you can tamper with them, you cannot change them. There is no centralized entity that is managing them, such as, for instance, like Facebook manages its code. Having said that, smart contracts have different functions. Some of them are there because you want them to be there in the first place, right? Let's say you want to have the ability to send money from the smart contract to a wallet or to another smart contract. Some are there without you knowing about them, right? Some different kind of vulnerabilities that are hidden in the code. And that's something that has close proximity to the auditing issue, and we'll talk about it in a second. Um, and some are meant to be used for one purpose, but can be also used for other purposes as well. So what usually happens in these hacks is that those hackers, they study the smart contract, right? First of all, the first question they ask themselves is how much money is in there, how much TVL, like total value locked in the smart contract. And once they see that the attack is going to be worthwhile, because a funny thing is that hackers, they think just like startup founders, right? Because they are thinking about the ROI, and hacking is a very expensive deal. Actually, in about, I think, like 3 months ago, there were two brothers arrested in Canada that were involved in a hack. They prepared themselves for months, and they
Okay.
they invested a lot of money in developers and in research, and sometimes it's a big team. So you have to think of the ROI even if you're a hacker, right? You have to be efficient, so to speak. So then they plan for that, and they see that it's indeed a lucrative target, and then they start studying it, right? Start seeing what are the functions of the smart contract, and try to basically use those functions to trick the smart contract to send money somewhere or to drain it in some other way. So just to give you a few examples, obviously, if you can somehow change the address to which the smart contract has to send money to, you can send it to yourself or to some proxy wallet and so on. Um, Oracles are also a huge issue because obviously oracles, for those who don't know, they are the data sources for smart contracts. You have to feed the smart contracts with oracles. If you can trick an oracle, let's say with pricing or with some other parameters that can cause the smart contract to send money to the wrong place or to initiate the draining, you can use that. And there are a bunch of different ways. One more interesting thing is allowances, right? All of us who are using different protocols, we know that when you start using a protocol, you have to give them permission to take money from your non-custodial wallet, right? So this permission is obviously something that we don't really think about. Okay, I'm going to give Uniswap or 1inch, the ability to withdraw $1 billion from my wallet in different tokens. But in some cases, that can also be used for draining my wallet. So it's not stealing from the smart contract per se, but stealing from the users that are connected to the smart contract from their wallets by tricking a certain function in the smart contract. And that's just to name a few. That's just some examples. Obviously, we are tracking all those different vectors, and we can tell that oftentimes at the stage of preparation. We're going to talk about the products in a second, but just kind of to highlight this, oftentimes you can see those attacks at the stage of preparation because before you execute the hack, there's a very long sequence that the hackers are taking before actually doing that. That's just to to draw a
Okay.
framework for the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good framework. It made me actually think of someone. I never realized there was this long preparation stage, or there was a lot of funds involved. But when you think about this, am I getting this correct? That when I have a sum, when I have an amount of money and I see an opportunity on the market, if I do a startup, I kind of maybe see there is potential, but there is a lot of risk involved. If I put my money in the coin or into whatever lending, whatever borrow protocol, I kind of see an opportunity, but there is no deterministic way. But when but if I turn to the dark side as a hacker and I see an exploit, I do like it. It lets me prepare. I don't have this runway as startups do. Maybe, and I also there is determinism around this, right? I know if I'm going to execute this certain action, I'm going to get this reward, and I basically need to make sure, and I have the time to make sure that my deterministic way of going around and getting this reward is safe and secure for me, which is which is really interesting. So the dark side does seem to have more determinism than the bright side, than the good side.
Listen, the dark side is an industry of its own because you have to understand that it becomes much harder to execute hacks. Don't forget that at least 50% of the work and the headache that you have as a hacker, not to pity for them, right? But you have to figure out a way to launder the money eventually, right? And it's also becoming much harder because I still remember the days when almost no exchange had KYC. Right now, it's really
No,
hard to
yeah.
find an exchange that doesn't have KYC. So things are becoming much more difficult for them, and that's why what we see, and we can go through the statistics for that. But just to give you an example, we saw only what we detected in Cyvers are close to $1.7 billion that were stolen in 2023. And actually, the number for 2024 is going to be much higher because we're halfway through, and we see that we're nearing this benchmark of 1.7 billion. The what we see is basically a correlation between the growth of the market and the amount of hacks and the also the methods of the hacks, right? Because at the end of the day, when the market is cash poor, nobody wants to hack it, right? And it's just not worth the while because then you have the headache of laundering the money, and you have the risk, and you have to employ people who are going to actually do that. That's why we see hacker alliances, we see governments being involved. Our CEO and co-founder had a very interesting article about the Lazarus Group of North Korea.
All
So
right.
you see that the image of somebody sitting in his parents' garage and hacking a smart contract is something that still exists, but they are becoming much more innovative, much smarter, and it's kind of conglomerates of hackers, right?
All right. Yeah, I'd be really willing to read about the Lazarus group. So yeah, I'm going to do it right after the podcast because it does seem like like an operation, like very like expert kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which I believe listening to you where the industry is moving towards becoming less of individuals. But that said, let's actually touch on talking KYC and centralized exchanges. Let's
Mm-hmm.
touch on sorting because this is a sort of a different uh,
Mm-hmm.
type of an attack where I'm sure the listeners already know, but there's been an issue with the sorting guys getting the funds out of the of Kraken, I believe, a centralized exchange. Can
Mm-hmm.
you share your unique perspective on this?
Sure. So just to give some background for those who haven't heard about it, the news broke I think a week and a half ago that basically Kraken, I think it originated with the chief security officer of Kraken that said that he was approached by uh, how do you call it, Web3 security investigators, telling him that there's a vulnerability, only for him to find out that. About 3 million of funds were missing from the Kraken. Again, what he claimed to be treasuries and not clients' funds. And then he claimed that basically they tried to quote unquote extort him. And then Certic countered saying that no, we actually did our job, trying to raise awareness about the vulnerability. And it's the other way around because Kraken tried to, push us to return the money and to, did it in an unfair way. Now, I'm gonna say, upfront that I have no idea who's right and who's wrong, but I think that we can take this case as a premise for a deeper discussion into what are auditing companies, what do they do, what do they don't do, and their work ethics, right? Um, just to add on top of that, in terms of the background, our CTO and co-founder Mayor actually published and added some additional information to that. And again, you will be the ones to
Okay.
judge who's right and who's wrong. But he actually found out that Certic had created a suspicious contract, and this contract was created way beforehand, right? Much beforehand, and it also it actually tried to test other exchanges as well, like OKX and Coinbase. So
Okay.
again, whether this was a practice of Certic, whether they tried to do the same thing to other exchanges or not, I'm not sure. I'm not going to be the judge of that.
Right.
I'm
Right.
just saying that the story is a little bit bigger, and it seems like this was kind of a practice that they implemented with respect to other exchanges as well. The news broke with Kraken, and that's what we know. What we don't know, we
Right.
don't know, but it's definitely there's a bigger story here from Certic's side. That's what I
Oh,
can tell.
okay. Okay. Yeah. This is pretty cool. To on this one again, I have a quick question. I'm kind of surprised how many traces the sourcing guys left on the chain. Would you think it's would you say it's common for the smart contract audit guys to not think that much about on-chain security because I would guess they look all day long into the smart contract themselves and then companies like Cyvers uh, would would be the ones that look more into the on-chain kind of traces, where everybody goes and what's happening there. Is this common or is this like I don't know how else to justify this by the way. So
Sure. So there's a big debate in the cybersecurity community around what's white hat, what's black hat, and what are the differential
all right,
differential lines between them. Right? It's a decade long or 2 3 decades long discussion, which I'm not the expert on. But what I can tell you is that think about it: auditing companies, they are basically technological companies that are paid to think like hackers, right? For those of you who don't know, before deploying a smart contract, you basically engage with with an auditing company, asking it to run a few tests on your code and to search for vulnerabilities, right? So again, they have to think like hackers. They have to think how to penetrate this smart contract or this wallet and so on and so forth. In terms of the traces on chain, these two things can look identical, right? The difference between white hat and black hat here is what do you do afterwards. So you see that there's an
All right.
opening, you see that there's a vulnerability in the code. You know, do you notify the company, get your bug bounty, you know, get paid for it? You're not altruistic about it. You're getting paid for it, and move on and allow the company to fix it, maybe helping it to fix it, or do you take the money and then notify the company? Again, I'm not going to be the judge on that. I really don't know. I'm just saying that this issue with Certic has raised the question on these work ethics of auditors. Because imagine you're paying to a company. In this particular case, Kraken didn't deploy Certic, right? But actually, me personally, when I worked in other projects previous to coming to Cyvers, we worked with a bunch of different auditing companies. And you actually employ someone, you open up all your code, even at the, I mean, not even, you're doing that at the pre deployment stage. So you're showing them all your secrets basically, and also explaining that to them, right? Because you have talks with them, and you expect them to fix those vulnerabilities and not to take advantage of them, right? So that's something that we should remember. By the way, speaking of regulations, I wouldn't be too surprised to see that in the future this whole auditor auditing relationship will somehow be regulated with some rules, because there are a lot of, you know, gray areas here that need to be addressed.
Okay. Well, yeah, this is a really good perspective, a really good point. On so you're actually open. Yeah, you open up all of your stuff, um, and humans are human. Yeah, this is a good point. So something else I wanted to ask you about is address poisoning. Since you mentioned, Cyrus was the biggest one that contributed to doing the research or report on it. Can you give some background on what address poisoning is first, and then uh, on your contribution to it,
Sure thing.
the
So
Cyrus?
address poisoning, basically, very simply put, is me tricking you to send your funds to the wrong address without even knowing that you did it. Right? That's the simplest way to think about it. And the way that those scammers do that is in very general lines. They are sending you, first of all, they're targeting you, okay, just like the practice that I've mentioned with respect to smart contracts. First of all, your wallet needs to be interesting enough, right? It needs to have enough money, and it needs to have some activity, because if you're just a buy and hold person, you know, if you're a hodler, then I will probably not target you, because there is no
Okay.
sense for that. So it should be a big wallet with some significant activity in it. And then once I do my due diligence on you, then I will poison your wallet, meaning I will send a certain amount of fake tokens, spam tokens, that look very much like real tokens. Let's say if you have USDT, I will send you USDTT, right? We all know that creating and minting BS tokens is something that is very common. And I will do it from an address that looks very, very, very similar to an address with which you interact uh, constantly. Okay? So just to land the
Uh,
conversation down, let's say you are working with a bunch of service providers. Let's say you're working with, I don't know, content people, auditing companies, and so on, and you're paying them in crypto, and every month you're sending $100,000 to this let's say content company from your wallet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a wallet that looks very similar to the address of the wallet of this company, and I'm going to send you some fake tokens. And then eventually, when you sit down to send the money to that company that you interact with, you're going to send it to me and not to that company, because you're going to copy paste an address that prima facie on its face looks exactly the same, because the beginning and the ending look the same. You know those articles when they write words, when they change like one letter in the middle, and you can't tell the difference, and you can still
All right.
read it. Our mind is programmed in a way that we see the beginning and the end, right? We skim through. We don't read every single letter or every single number. So when you see that wallet address, you think that it's the real deal, and then you send the money to the wrong place. So we actually uncovered the biggest, the biggest address poisoning scam in history. It happened about a month ago or a month and a half ago. $68 million in one single transaction. I think it was WBTC, that were sent from a
Okay.
wallet to a fake wallet, right? So that's actually very common. The people don't talk about it enough, but it's actually very common. And the thing is that those scammers, they poison a bunch of different wallet addresses, and then they wait, because you can send this money tomorrow or you can send this in 3 months, but they're still gonna earn from that when you do that. So actually, your listeners should think whether their wallet was poisoned. To be perfectly honest, me as a crypto guy, before I came to Cyvers, I didn't even know what it is. And then I go to my MetaMask wallet and I see a bunch of fake tokens, fake NFTs. God knows who sent them to me, right? So I think that the first thing that your viewers will do is check their wallets, and then they should really be minded about it. When it comes to companies and high net worth individuals, obviously we're helping them to deal with that. We can notify them in real time, because we can see it at the stage of preparation, and we can help mitigate this problem.
Okay. Well, you actually made me realize something, that I'm a complete noob in this, because whenever I send, uh, crypto assets on chain, I always check the first characters and the last ones. I never check anything else. I guess this is how us humans operate. Just the first one and the last one. How difficult can it be? But turns out, uh, I'm completely open to the dress poisoning attack, which is interesting. Which makes me think back in my time when I had a very very brief stint in the Web2 security space. We had there is one standard kind of global base of the common attacks called Mitra.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm drinking my morning coffee, I can always get online and check what's going on in there. It was pretty fun as well. With Web3, I have no idea other than getting on rec.news, and seeing all those millions of dollars drained. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do I get more educated? How do security Web3 security guys share this common standard or the common knowledge base, or exchange of information?
It's a very good question. Just like many other things, just like DeFi is trying to imitate the kind of traditional finance
Oh yeah,
world, and is still building itself, and still building the infrastructure and the common knowledge and the education and so on. By the same token, pun intended, that's how the
it's
Web3
good.
cybersecurity, that's how the cybersecurity world works. It is at a very nascent stage. For instance, I just explained about Cyvers, and we're kind of creating the industry little by little, because we're addressing problems that are relatively new, and we're doing it in a very different way. And you have to kind of trailblaze here, and build the path for the industry, for the entire industry. So one of the things that we did is that we founded OSWAR, which is Open Standard Web3 Attack Reference, which is basically an alliance of Web3 and Web2 cybersecurity experts, trying to build kind of like the Mitra, what you've mentioned, trying to build terms that can explain, to have some common language on the different attack vectors, and try to create some discovery around attack vectors and how they work and how they are constructed. Because the first step for solving a problem is identifying it, right? And oftentimes the hackers are using techniques and using vectors that haven't even been named yet and haven't even been
All right.
identified yet, right? So that's one of the things that we do. We're constantly learning. There are always new ways, and we're trying to educate first of all ourselves, but also the entire industry on the perils and the dangers of these attacks. And we have a lot to learn, and a lot to teach and a lot to learn.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. So Oswald, for all the listeners, just guys, go ahead and look it up. It's
Yeah,
really, really interesting. There is never. You always need to be learning in Web3, and for me personally, it's a lot of fun. So it's pretty
yeah,
cool.
for sure.
But
It's
do it.
oswald.org. And by the way, I neglected
Oswald.
to say, just to give you a sense of why we're so heavily invested in that and why we're doing that in the first place. So our two co-founders are coming from the more traditional industries. They created AI mechanisms for detecting anomalies and different malfunctions in again traditional industries, heavy industries, and they took all this knowledge and basically implemented it into Web3. So this heavy background on spotting anomalies and cybersecurity that they had in the more traditional and settled industries where everything is already kind of in its place and you're only optimizing it, they brought this into the Web3 space. And then they figured, listen, we need to create some sort of a standardization across the board so that we can actually start collaborating and working with other with other experts and helping the community with that.
All right. Yeah. There you have it, guys. Top security guys sharing their knowledge. So, which I always appreciate. And speaking of that, actually, since you mentioned a very good point of that, you guys and the other ones as well are doing this, trailblazing and identifying the attacks that are not even yet known and the new patterns. Eventually, I believe you just have to start building products for this, to help protect the guys. And I think it's a very, very good thing that you guys are doing. It's also, I believe, it's a lot of fun. It would be a lot of fun for me. Uh, but I would be willing to hear from you on that perspective, as in, the decisions that went into it, or how you guys started those products, what the products are, because it's obviously based on a lot of experience in non Web3 security and the Web3 security as well, because of your very, very heavy background of the
Mhm.
Cyvers company. I did have a quick look, and you guys seem to have a bunch of products like Vigilance, Address Shield, and Reputation Scoring. So I'm very curious. Run me through those.
Sure. So, first of all, just to explain a little bit about how we do what we do, and then we can have a better understanding on the products. So, after, as I said in the beginning, after the founders figured out that you need to have this layer of runtime protection, right? That audits are doing their thing, and then you have the kind of the Chainalysis and the TRMs of the world that can tell you what went wrong, but you need to have this guardian angel in the middle that will actually find out if you're being hacked in real time, and again sometimes beforehand at the preparation stage. So once they figured this out, they started searching for how to build it. So the idea was that what we're going to do is we're going to scan the entire blockchain, right? And right now we're working with 9 different blockchains and constantly adding more to the list, scanning them block by block, 24/7. Also combining it with other data feeds, on chain and off chain, and eventually, once you see everything in real time, you can be exposed to all the data. And then what they did is they built AI models that were trained on a typical behavior of hackers and scammers, right? So we talked about how the victims and the perpetrators are human, and at the end of the day, it's all human behavior. So we analyzed thousands of different attacks and tried to see similarities, patterns within those attacks. And we understood the sequence. We understood what they do, how they do it. How can you spot it in real time and sometimes at a very early stage? And once we did it, fast forward to now, what we do is we scan all the blockchains. Whenever we spot an anomaly, it gets picked up by one of the AI models or several AI models. I'm obviously simplifying this. Probably our CTO is sitting right now and saying, "No, it's not really like that." But just for the sake of the audience who are not necessarily technically oriented, the AI models are assessing all each and every one of those anomalies, and then boom, in real time, they can tell you if it's the real deal and classify it, right? So obviously, everything happens at a split of a second, very low latency, close to zero false positive. So you can tell that if you're being notified, it is the real deal, and you have to respond accordingly. As for the response, we can talk about it separately because it differs from our clients, from client to client. Some are implementing more automated mechanisms to stop it in real time. Others do it manually. But the main thing is that they know in real time if they're being hacked or triggered in some other way, and they can solve it and they can stop the incident from happening. That's kind of in a nutshell. Now, as for the products themselves, very simply put, it differs from different clients. But at the end of the day, all we have to know is the addresses of your assets, whether it's smart contracts or wallets, and we can protect you. The integration is, as easy as it comes. You don't have to do anything. We just have to know which assets are yours, and then you're protected. By the way, many of our clients are also protecting themselves from more kind of cascading effects. So if you're invested in other assets as well, if you hold your assets in some, I don't know, staking mechanism, lending mechanism, and you want to cover yourself from third party risk, we can also help with that. So it's a very, like, we can be very, very modular and customize the way that we protect the clients as per their philosophy of and tech stack.
Okay. Well, yeah, that is a very good point. I never thought of this, but say, for example, if I'm a high net worth, individual, and I decide to put, you know, an amount of money into UU, for example, right, or other protocols, I have no way of actually, am I going to order security audit for the UU guys? What do I do? So I can just come to you guys and say, hey, this is what I'm gonna do, and you guys will protect me. That's a very good point. Actually, I never thought of it this way. Uh, but this one is pretty cool. This one is pretty cool. Uh,
Just
Speaking
to
of
just to
that, you
add,
get
yeah. So sorry,
go ahead.
just to add to that example. Think about it. Let's say with DAO mechanisms, right? So DAO mechanisms, at the end of the day, they are functioning with governance tokens, and when you know who holds the governance tokens and who can actually trick the vote and influence the vote, you first of all know your weak spots with respect to somebody wanting to trick that, either by a hack, either by gaining access to a wallet and so on. But you can also protect yourself from that. So we're also helping DAOs, for instance, protecting their governance mechanisms to make sure that they're not being tricked. With respect to let's say hedge funds and large trading firms, algo traders. There's a bunch of other cascading effects that might happen if some token from somewhere gets liquidated, and then it influences everything. So the risk management, whether it's security or financial risk in DeFi and in Web3 in general, becomes much, much more multi-layered and complex. And you have to address that. You cannot only look at your funds and you cannot only look at your assets. You have to have this comprehensive look and comprehensive threat intel feed that we help to facilitate.
All right. Yeah, that's like full programmable money. Money is um, it's not something you can just put in the bank, but there's a full stack, like a Lego stack, that you need to take care of all the individual pieces because nobody, you like you really need. Sometimes it feels like a Jenga instead of a Lego because of the cascading effect that you mentioned. So
Yeah.
one thing doesn't go, it goes wrong, and then you're screwed. Uh, but
That's a very good analogy. I'm going to steal that from you.
go ahead. uh, um, that's kind of the stack of the contracts. But there is also the other side, which we touched a little bit on earlier, which is, and I believe you guys have, like, you can talk a little bit on reputation scoring, or also on whether and because you're in a unique position again as a lawyer, being in the legal space and security and Web3, all at the same time, the on-chain traces that the let's call them hackers leave, and guys like ZachXBT doing their part for revealing all of this stuff and then reporting all of them. This is kind of a little bit of a question of anonymity anonymity versus not being anonymous or being de-anonymized by someone else against your will on the chain, regardless of what your actions are, good or bad. Where do you stand on this? Or, with your experience, can you share your perspective on this? Because I'm really curious.
Yeah, so before I dive in, just to explain what reputation scoring is, essentially, given the fact that we can spot uh, every type of malicious activity online, and given the fact that we're mapping it and putting this into our database, and we have a unique perspective across the board, we can map not only the actual incident, but also all the players that are involved in it, right? So if you have a malicious smart contract, there's a wallet that deployed it, and sometimes there are several smart contracts that were malicious that were involved in such an incident, and we can map the entire, the entire sequence and all the players in that sequence. So the result of that is that we're adding per week. Listen to that, take per week
Okay.
1 million malicious addresses per week,
That's
wallets and
kind of
smart
crazy.
contracts.
This is a completely crazy number. Okay.
For sure,
Wow.
for sure. So I think that, the days of when people, even individuals, but obviously companies and high net worth individuals, interacted with wallets or smart contracts without doing some basic due diligence on the wallet or smart contract, I think that these days are close to being over, because the dangers are too high, whether it's dangers of being exposed to a hack or to some other type of malicious activity, or even the legal danger of being involved with such a wallet, right? So if you're conducting your business in crypto, or even if you're just an individual that is trading and eventually you want to cash in and take the money off ramp and put it in your bank account, you're going to find out that one single wallet or one single protocol that you interacted with can basically mess up all your wallet and all the assets that you have in them. So we all need some basic KYT, right? And again, the more money you have, or if you're a company and you're serving clients, you need to have a much more stringent KYT. And on that premise, we created this very powerful tool. All you have to do is just copy paste an address, whether it's a wallet or a smart contract, and immediately we can give you an assessment on what danger may arise, if any, from interacting with that wallet, and we can give you the entire breakdown. So let's say if a wallet, was involved in a hack, and then they try to funnel the money through Tornado Cash and launder it, we can tell you that, and you will know, you will do the math whether you want to interact with it or not. Now, what you were talking about is another layer of this challenge. So let's say I know that the wallet is malicious. How do I know who's behind that wallet? A person, a company, an alliance of hackers, and so on. So that is still tricky. And on a case by case basis, you mentioned Zach XBT. These malicious actors are being undoxed. but it's definitely not enough, right? It's something that law enforcement agencies and individuals and the media, by the way, the crypto media are dealing with. But there's a huge gap between the two, right? Sometimes they're being undoxed because they want to extort you, and then you can somehow know who's the sender. Sometimes they're being undoxed because somehow if you run a forensics examine on the interactions of that wallet, you can say maybe like the geolocation or something like that. But it's extremely hard, with that respect. It's not there yet to actually know who's the perpetrator, who the perpetrator really is.
All right. All right. Yeah. Yeah. But I do like the reputation scoring system that you guys have that you mentioned, because is a huge Web3, Web3 ahead. I kind of like this industry even more, talking to you, because this means that I can make my own decisions, right? I do, but
Mhm.
you guys do all the heavy lifting of providing the information, being there to protect me. But at the same time, it's not like I'm in full control of the banking system, which I do not hate, obviously. But at least I know, when I work with a company like Cyvers, for example, I have all the tools that I need, but I'm not going to be, blocked on my vacation trip to the Philippines, for example, if I make a few transactions in there and the bank decides I'm being suspicious. I kind of, and they are not even going to share the, why they block it. It's just their algorithm tricked. But with you guys, I can go and check out the reputation scoring, for example, system, and have this tool and decide on my own whether I want to do the transaction or not. What's going on in there?
Yeah, just to give you an example on how some of our clients are using this service. So some of them are using this internally because as a company you also have to be careful and have to understand who you're working with and who you're interacting with, especially when you have a very sensitive wallet or a very sensitive smart contract that holds your funds. You don't want to plague it with malicious interactions. But also, many companies, for instance, wallets, exchanges, are using this service for their end users. So they are integrating the reputation scoring, and obviously they design it in their own way, and they create their own UI for that, their own interface for that. We are in the background, right? We are only helping them with that, but their users, let's say if you're a wallet, you can know in real time if the wallet that you want to send your money to is a legit wallet or not. By the way, speaking of address poisoning, right, and issues of that sort. So it's a very very powerful tool that already proved itself with uh, with our clients and with their clients. So I'm really, we keep hearing about another use case that this was used for, because once you have the information, you as a company know how to implement it in the right way. Some of them are going to be more stringent, and they are going to, let's say, block certain transactions that pass a certain threshold. Others may be more liberal and just saying, the clients can do whatever they want, but we want to warn them. So it's up to the company to decide. Maybe in the future it will be up to the regulator to decide. But right now we're just trying to provide them with the range of possibilities to go about it the way they want to.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Looks like with the guys like you on the market in the industry, the window of opportunity for a lot of hackers is tightening, even though they are being inventive, with their things. Uh, but it does feel more secure for sure.
Just,
We
just to give
are.
you just to
Yeah.
give you a number on sorry to interrupt you with respect to
Yeah.
that.
Go ahead.
We actually calculated. I mentioned earlier that in 2023 we spotted 1.7 billion dollars that were lost. We actually calculated that on average we could have saved 60% of that money. Imagine that. Let it sink. 60% of that money.
That's
and
that's
and and in
crazy.
some incidents we're talking about 100% because we could have prevented it before the attack has happened. So that's why, that's our mission right now, to make sure that this number will be brought to close to zero, and I believe that we can do it. Um, Companies just have to be minded about it, and they have to work with the right partners to make sure that they are indeed, mitigating those problems. Because, like, to be perfectly honest, me and you, we were in the crypto industry for a very long time. We have the perspective of the previous waves. I remember, in 2017 with the ICO craze and everything, nobody cared about security, right? People were,
Sure, for sure.
people were doing a
Me
white
neither.
paper. Yeah,
Neither did
people
I, to be
were.
honest.
Yeah, founders had a white paper, and then they were, building a smart contract, launching it with the UI, and that's it. Good luck to you all. And then obviously gradually things started changing, and the auditing companies came in. But now I think that the industry needs to grow up and needs to understand that the dangers are much much higher. The probability for the dangers of hacks and scams and other malicious activity are much higher. And it's enough to have one good hack to mess up the entire company, either financially or reputation wise. So we're on a mission to educate the industry, to help the industry to prevent this. Hopefully, the hackers are going to be much, much poorer, and the companies will flourish and will not have to be worried about that.
Yeah, I do. That said, I do like the blockchain as a concept. It is an open is an open box that anyone can hack around with this. So if hackers want to fool around this, they can be white hat hackers, right? And
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm sure it like you guys as well. I'm sure there is a lot of uh, just fun, just plain fun, in your day-to-day operations of looking all this stuff on chain and protecting everyone. I myself would probably not be able to do it because I think that will put me, that's a lot of pressure if you deploy your system with the company in there, and you're protecting millions of or hundreds of millions or tens of millions of dollars in there. That's a lot of pressure. The kind of pressure you can only deal with the kind of the background that you guys have. Otherwise, I would personally sleep. But that said, again, I do appreciate all the stuff that you guys are doing for this. Uh, we are almost at around 1 hour mark, so I think we can do a quick recap on the stuff that we talked about, and then Michael gave us a very very unique perspective on the again on the legal side, in where the law enforcement agencies are in Web3 today, and that not all security is just smart contract security. There are other attack vectors on this, and the Cyvers guys obviously know how to do this, since they uncovered one of the biggest address poisoning acts, which is $68 million. Mind blowing. What's even more mind blowing is 1.7 billion funds lost in 2023, and it looks like 2024 this number is going to be at least twice as big, I guess, and 60 to even 100% of those could have been saved. So,
Mm-hmm.
guys, educate yourself with the Cyvers guys, and go check out their oswar.org. Check out their products. Michael, if you have a Twitter account, we'll post it in the YouTube video,
Yeah,
or just follow the Cyvers. Yep.
just if I may, just to add a few more things. First of all,
Go
we
ahead.
have a very
Sure.
active Twitter profile called Cyvers Alerts. You can see alerts in real time. It's actually the go-to feed between me and you, right? The Zach XBT and the guys from Rect News and a bunch of others are constantly following us. They use
Okay.
us as a source, and we're actually very humbled to be such. Um, all the crypto media companies, if you Google Cyvers, you will see that we're mentioned at least once a week, and that's due to the fact that we're almost always the first ones to publish something. Sometimes we're the only ones to publish something. Again, due to the accuracy of the system and the fact um, that we have all this platform that enables us to find that in real time. Obviously, we don't publish everything, but you can see a lot of hacks, scams on a daily basis. So I really urge you to follow it. Also, you can find us on LinkedIn. the executives and the company itself, you can reach out to us. We're more than happy to answer questions, to educate about the dangers in the industry. We're getting quite a few reach outs per week, and always happy to respond and to help other industry members and community members.
All right. Yeah. There you have it, guys. Pretty cool. And sign up with Chainstack, of course, as well. The number one Web3 infrastructure company.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Any final word? Any final word of wisdom? Kind of the go-to for the listeners.
I would say that it's a brave new world, right? I think that Web3 is only at the beginning. You see all the institutional players coming inside, and you know that it's first of all here to stay, and two, it's here to grow. And I think that the more it grows and the more it expands, and the more new players are coming in and more money pouring in, I think that the threats are going to be bigger and more innovative and more and crazier, might I say, right? So I think that people need to be minded and educated about cybersecurity, at least the same way that they are educated about the financial dangers, right? Because if you look at the degen guys, they know how to spot whenever something fluctuates half percent below, right? And they know how a liquidation in some protocol affects them. But oftentimes people are not aware about the Web3 security dangers, and they should. Companies should be aware, traders should be aware, institutionals definitely should be aware, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to educate ourselves and to understand who's who and what can actually put your money in danger.
All right. All right. Cool. There you have it, guys. And thank you very much, Michael, for being with us today.
Thank you,
Thanks a
Ike.
lot.
Thank you so much.